الله أكبر الله أكبر. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
السلام عليكم. الله أكبر الله أكبر. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Ya Allah, we come this Friday again to struggle in affirming the truth, that you are the truth, that you are our one and only sustainer, you who created the heavens and the earth, and constructed them and placed them with a careful and intricate balance that many of us strive still to discover and constantly turn in awe to your creation. Lord of the easts and the wests, of the seen and the unseen, Allah who is within and without, you alone we turn to for help and for guidance, and strive for your furqan, for your criterion for how to live life, so that we may find true certainty, so we may make of this life what it is intended to be, which is not pointless, which is not idle play, but something serious and something with purpose. We strive not to just go through this life as Muslims, as a tool for our own pleasure, both in this life and the hereafter, but strive to bring your reality and your truth and your will into this life as your vicegerents. Ya Rabbil Alameen. And bring peace and blessings to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his family and his companions, living and dead. And to all the prophets and lovers of you. What is it that stands in the way of our ideal self, our ideal world? We get a lot of questions, people reaching out to us. And a lot of those questions they have many threads, commonalities between them. But there's one theme, especially in light of Gaza, especially being overwhelmed by Sudan, especially with the travesty of the holy sites being under occupation by a puppet dictator family that was placed by the enemies of Islam. It feels like we are surrounded by injustice and darkness and ugliness. And a common thread is, where is God? What do I do? Not even where is God, but what do I do? It feels too overwhelming. It feels too too big. I don't know how I'm supposed to change this. And oftentimes when I respond to them, I tell them, you're not supposed to know how to change this. You don't need to know how to change this. Step one is to build a relationship with the revelation. Because it has the answers. And the miracle of this revelation is that it is a continuing revelation. It is not a static book, but it is one that 1400 years later is still more relevant than you realize. Every time I go to it, I get something new. I had a conversation with someone the other day, and it's a conversation I've had actually many times, at discussing someone suffering from addiction. And what confused this person, who is not an addict and has never experienced anything with an addict, is how was it that they burned their life to the ground, that they destroyed everything? It seems counterintuitive. It seems to not serve the ego. It seems to actually be a disservice to the ego. I know that them as a person, they care a lot about what other people think about them. They care about their image. They're very fearful. But why was it that they were able to, why was it that they kept doing what they were doing? Because they were risking all those things that they seem so invested in protecting. And that is one of the phenomenal parts of addiction, and not limited to addiction, is it's almost as if the ego would destroy itself before surrendering that it might be doing something wrong, or that it should do something different, or that perhaps what it's doing isn't even serving itself, let alone harming many other people. I don't think that this is restricted to those who have problems of addiction or more serious problems. In fact, I think that this is in every single human being. 1400 years ago, the Quran talked about this. During medieval times, it answered this question. And not in the form of addiction, but as a universal trait of human beings, both believers and disbelievers. Surah Ad-Dukhan, translated the smoke, focuses on this. And it begins by giving you the solution. In Muhammad Asad's translation, verse 7 of Surah Dukhan 44, the sustainer of the heavens and the earth and all that is between them, if you could but grasp it with inner certainty. This isn't a happenstance comment. It's actually giving you the solution to what happens throughout the rest of the surah. And what it talks about, what it goes to next, is it talks about people with shakkin ya'labun, translated as playful doubt, or they're playing in doubt. it's a very interesting phrase. It's an interesting phrase because, as the Quran often does, is it words things in a certain way where you can go in a lot of different directions while still maintaining its specificity. The thing about play, you're thinking about children, is play is make-believe. Play is fantasy. Play is delusion. We like to create stories. We like to create stories so much that our life revolves around stories in a way which, isn't necessarily bad. It can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. But we are meaning and story constructing entities. But if you're not aware of this aspect in the human psyche, what will happen is you will start living in delusion and not know it. You will think that reality is happening as it is, if you are not aware that you are constantly constructing a story about yourself. And if you don't know to look for something, you're not going to be conscious of it. And if you're not conscious of something, you are not going to be able to control it or change it. In fact, it will control you. The other part of this is shakkan, doubt. And this doubt is not the healthy doubt, which I would venture to call curiosity. It is not the type of doubt where when I sincerely want to understand something or sincerely want to build something, I approach it with a curiosity to look at it from all angles. This is a doubt that is constructed to preserve the status quo, to keep things just as they are, even if it is a disservice to the self, even if it keeps you trapped in self-destructive behaviors or keeps you trapped in poverty or whatever. The human brain likes for things to be as they were. It feels immensely uncomfortable when things start to change, which I'm sure a lot of people who like self-help books and self-progress and that kind of thing, they're familiar with the concept of you're not really scared of failure. What you're actually more scared of is success. You're scared of things changing, and if you have been most accustomed to failure your whole life, that is what you will seek and what you will create. It is the type of doubt that is contempt prior to investigation. Having your mind made up about something and using that as a reason to not look into it. And saying, yeah, I know, but that doesn't work for me because, this and so on, and that keeps people trapped. And for people who are suffering from addiction, it kills them. Literally. It is a doubt that is constructed to protect privilege and entitlements. Even if those privileges and entitlements are for an elite that is not you. And it is immensely subconscious. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that shortly after introducing this doubt element to the surah, talks about a torment that is placed on people, a suffering. And in that suffering, there is a window of willingness that comes about, where they plead, please, show me the way out. Get me out of this. Relieve this suffering. In some translations of the Quran, it words it as if it's the final day, but I don't know how much I agree with that, because it talks about Allah relieving the suffering, and then they continue to go on disbelieving. They swing back. And we know that on the final day, there's not going to be any swinging back. There is just going to be truth. And regardless, it could be both. Because that's what I see happen time and time again, with myself, with all of us. When we're in trouble and when things are painful, we are praying and asking Allah to relieve that suffering, to just change things. But then when things actually are changed, we go back. It is hard to change. It is hard to build new neural pathways in the brain. I would even go so far as to say that we need help. This doubt creates something that Allah refers to as dukhan mubin, which is another concept that from translation to translation differs. In fact, this surah begins talking about kitab mubin, a clear book, a clarifying book. It mentions Rasul Mubin, Dukhan Mubin, Sultan Mubin, and also a clarifying test. It's tantalizing. Why use this word Mubin, which connotes clarity, distinction, a clear understanding between what is right and what is wrong, and a surah that the early Muslims saw fit to title Dukhan. In the Project Ulum and Halaqas, we were taught in the halaqah that covered this surah that this doubt, this commitment to this doubt, that not a momentary doubt that passes through your mind. We all have that. But living your life according to this doubt, almost as if it is your furqan, your criterion, produces a smoke which obfuscates reality, almost creating another reality. And that where there is smoke, there is a fire. There's a problem. But you're blinded to it. The nature of this smoke and the extent to which this smoke blinds, the extent to which this smoke is extremely threatening, is captured in the example that comes right after that. And it's the main example in this surah. And the example that we're given is one that is discussed so many times in the surah with Pharaoh and Musa, each time focusing on a different aspect of that story. And this time, the aspect that we are focused on is the Exodus. Number one, that Musa came to warn Pharaoh, but ultimately what he was asking was the right for self-determination, the right to freedom of speech, the right to freedom of religion, to not be persecuted. He said, if you want to believe this is your Lord and I've been sent as a messenger from him to warn you. But if you do not, all I ask is that you let me live. and you let me preach and you let me practice as I want. And Pharaoh said no. He chased him through the sea with his forces. And Allah tells Musa to leave the sea parted. And you would think that if you approached a sea that was parted, someone who is so attached to luxury, someone who is so attached to their gardens, to their way of life, might say, maybe it will fall down. Maybe it's not going to stay parted if I go through. That would seem logical. After all, you're the ruler of this land and you know that the sea was not like that before. Yet he charged in, and you know the rest of the story. They were all drowned and all killed. And Allah even points this out in verses 25 through 27. And so they perished, and how many gardens did they leave behind? And water tunnels, and fields of grain, and noble dwellings, and all that life of ease in which they used to delight. Isn't this a lot like what I was saying with the addict? Addiction doesn't just strike the homeless. Addiction is not just the disease for people who like drugs or like a good time. It strikes everybody. Even people who have very good jobs, who have a loving family. It strikes them, and they engage in such risky behavior that the people around them are thinking, are they insane? They have so much, and they're risking it all. For what? They don't even seem happy, yet they keep going. They seem miserable, and oftentimes they do lose everything. Later on in the surah, Pharaoh is described as a musrif. In one translation it says tyrant. But Muhammad Asad says a very interesting thing, which is and indeed we delivered the children of Israel from the shameful suffering inflicted on them by Pharaoh, seeing that he was truly outstanding among those who waste their own selves. And I thought this is interesting. That's very different than tyrant. It's very different than transgressor. And Muhammad Asad actually explains why he chose this. He says, the expression musrif, which often denotes one who is given to excesses or commits excesses, or one who is wasteful, has in the above context the meaning of one who wastes his own self, which is, he took this from Razi, namely destroys his spiritual potential by following only his base impulses and failing to submit to any moral imperative. Similar expression occurring in many places and rendered by me as those who have squandered themselves. In the sense in which it is used here, the term israf, wastefulness or lack of moderation in one's doings, is almost synonymous with the term tughayyan, overweening arrogance, occurring in the preceding verse, and it goes on from a different surah, from Surah Yunus. It is a very specific type of tyranny, coming from a very specific type of culture that wastes, a culture lost in playfulness, a culture lost in fantasy, looking at the earth as if it is something just to satiate the desires and impulses. But the amazing thing about it is that it constructs a monster of its own that needs to be fed. The fog blinds that type of self from losing all the ni'mah, all the gifts and blessing that they've been given in pursuit of shutting up whatever Musa is in front of them. And whether you are a leader or you're an average Joe Schmo, that you'll do this with your friends, with your family. You will do this with any opposing view that points the light at you. It makes you feel threatened. Ask Allah for forgiveness. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه اللهم صل. Allah finishes the surah by coming back to this idea of play. In verse 38, Allah says, "We have not created the heavens and earth and all that is between them in mere idle play. None of this have we created without a truth, but most of them understand not." And I take you back to verse 7, where I said was the solution. The sustainer of the heavens and the earth and all that is between them, if you could but grasp it with inner certainty. Sight, not obfuscated by a smoke, created by a fire, which we created. Created through our choices, created through our habits, created through our cultures, that have ingrained both consciously decided upon and unconscious behaviors and habits. This smoke can most certainly manifest as anxiety and depression and discomfort and isolation and all of the icky negative feelings that we don't like. But this smoke can also manifest as the exact opposite. It can manifest as certainty. It can manifest as self-love. It can manifest as arrogance. It can manifest as anything. That's scary. Because sometimes the right thing doesn't feel good. And sometimes the right thing feels great. And sometimes bad things feel terrible. And sometimes bad things feel great. The Quran warns us against following our feelings. You cannot trust them. They are not your God. They indicate something. They are not to be smashed out or vilified, but they also are not a reflection of God. Because Allah says elsewhere in the Quran that don't think just because I give you good things that is a sign that you are chosen or that you're doing the correct thing. And that goes for money, but that also goes for feelings. That goes for family and your way of life. But it also goes for your intellect. At the beginning, or the first khutbah, I said that the first step is building a relationship with revelation. And as I said that, I realized, but there's something that I think has to come before, or is as equally as important, that needs to be developed. And that is wisdom. That is self-knowledge and external knowledge. Even if a surgeon is doing surgery, and they've been practicing for 20 years, they know a surgery inside out, but the surgeon has very bad vision. Would you trust him to do your surgery without corrective lenses? And usually the way we go through life is we like focusing on one but not the other. And there's, people fall in different categories. There are people who love self-discovery and therapy and self-help books, and they're addicted to that way of life, but they don't want to learn the surgery. And there are people who love external knowledge and who love politics and reading books and so on and so forth, but don't want to consider whether their vision is clear. Both are necessary. Both are indispensable. And this is something that we learn in Surah Nur, where Allah invites us to consider the example of a lamp. And there are multiple parts to the lamp. There's the fire, there's the oil, there is the glass, and there is even the placement of the lamp in the room. And if the glass is foggy, or if the oil is, I don't know oil very well, or what oil they use for lamps, but if the oil is impure, I don't know if that affects lamps, but you get my point. Or if you have the lamp in the closet, that's all going to affect the amount of light that it produces. It might seem like an overwhelming task, especially for those of us that are overthinkers and perfectionists. But all you have to do is one step at a time. All you have to do is ask Allah to guide you, because you won't have it figured out. And most importantly, you're not alone. And if you're in a bad place right now, I want you to remember that it's your best thinking that got you to that bad place. And the good news is that you don't have to do this alone. The only reason why it feels alone is because you've never given building a relationship with Allah, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, a chance. Or perhaps other Muslims or your family who raised you Muslim did not impart how to build that relationship. Go inward. Seek help. Ask questions and be curious with life. Be curious with the solution. And if you're not praying all 5 prayers, then at least first thing when you get up in the morning and before you go to sleep, fall to your knees and ask Allah for help. And I promise you that help will come. And it will come when Allah, who is the best planner and the best constructor, knows that it should come. And it might not come in the way you expected, but it will come, or the way you want it, but it will come in the way that you need it most. Allah, forgive our sins, guide us on the straight path. Help us, Ya Allah, help us to see right from wrong, to see through the fogs that we've created in ourselves. Guide us to you in this life and the hereafter, and help to fill our hearts with love for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Help us to honor the gift that came through him. Help us to honor what his family has honored in their way of life and his companions. Help us to defeat ourselves and to remember that the greatest struggle, Jihad Akbar, is the Jihad al-Nafs, the Jihad against the self. Ya Allah, help us and guide us. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Wa aqimus salah.